So when I work on positioning for tech B2B SaaS companies, what we try to do is basically to just clearly define who they are, what do they do, who they do it for, and how they do it uniquely, better, and differently. The thing that I always say is 70% of the work to me is research, and then the messaging and the copy almost write itself. I'm Chris. I'm originally from Italy, moved to the UK, and before doing what I'm doing now, which is I'm a messaging strategist and a conversion copywriter for B2B SaaS, I was a software engineer in industrial automation, did that for 10 years in Italy. And then one fine day, I decided that I wanted to play drums with my band, and I started looking for how to make money online. And I stumbled on copywriting, and I was kind of hooked from the moment that I realized, okay, there's a lot of psychology. You have to understand decision making. And so I got impressed by that and started studying on the side, evenings, weekends, and then took that full time when I moved to the UK. And that's been going on since now with Conversion Alchemy.
So Conversion Alchemy is a consultancy.
Yeah, it's a
agency?
small agency. Basically me, my junior copywriter, an assistant. Sometimes I might work with other contractors, but super small for now. Because that's one thing that I always like to mention to my clients as well, is that I like the craft itself still. I don't want to scale an agency just for the sake of scaling and making more money. And so, yeah.
Yeah, you're like a tradesman. Like
Yeah, exactly. Craftsman.
Craftsman. Like you're the blacksmith, like on the
Yeah.
street. Yeah, it used to be that you learn a trade and you're not trying to optimize shareholder value, and you just build up your stock price as a craftsperson. And
Yeah.
I definitely admire that. That's something that's very popular with like 37 Singles. David Hannemeyer Hansen like talks about, like, in this recent podcast with Lex Friedman. He was just saying, yeah, I'm looking at these OpenAI people, and I'm like wondering, what am I doing? I'm just working on a project management software. Should I be like working on like more interesting things? And then they bring it back to, there's like a shoemaker complain that they're not making like innovative shoes. It's like there's just there's like a quiet like dignity to just being good at something and then just repeating the process and mastering your craft. And
exactly. Yeah. And plus, I would say, like, now with AI, it completely reinvented all our jobs. So there's always something to learn and rework on.
Yeah. So AI, it has probably been pretty disruptive. I'm going to frame my AI question in more of a taste lens, right? So a lot of folks have been trying to use AI to flatten like the skill, like the job gaps, and say, oh, I don't have to be good at it, but I could just use AI to help me write and stuff like that. Even before AI, what anti-patterns have you seen in copywriting? Because I feel like especially in the tech industry, copywriting is not a well-represented art form.
Yeah, I mean, the most common pattern, especially when it comes to companies, B2B SaaS, especially tech, doing that internally, is the jargon stuffed copy that you see typically. So, and that stems from a lot of their product knowledge, technical products, but also internal silos. So product marketing and sales might not communicate effectively, or they might not have a messaging framework that kind of unifies them and tells them, okay, this is how we communicate what we do, who we do it for, and how we do it better, uniquely, or different. And so then everyone starts kind of saying different things or using different language. And also the other thing, they might not really understand their ICPs deeply. And so there's confusion around that. And in turn, the messaging and the copy as well are not super clear or super compelling, because the thing that I always say is 70% of the work to me is research. And then the messaging and the copy almost write itself.
Yeah, I guess like a surgeon, most of the job of a surgeon is mostly preparation and mastery and like knowledge.
Yeah.
And then the surgeries of themselves might take an hour or less than an hour. Dice work.
It's like, was that story about, was it Picasso that someone asked him about, like, hey, like, make me this sketch? and he says something like, "It's gonna be a super high amount of
Yeah.
the cost," but and then tells, "Oh yeah, but it took me like 20 years to actually learn and get to this point."
Yeah, you're paying for the experience because it's all that intuition and judgment that they're able to quickly deploy like a work.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
wisdom, it's applied knowledge, basically.
Yeah. How do you get wisdom, like in your experience? Like, where does wisdom come from? Yeah.
To me, well, in copywriting, especially when you're working as a copywriter, there's two types of knowledge. So there's general knowledge, specialized knowledge. Especially when you work with a lot of clients, you have to kind of know how to be a copywriter. And then you have to also know the specific product or in the market and the industry. So those two types of knowledge. But also, and that's something that I learned a couple of years ago, because at the beginning I was merely a conversion copywriter. So I was jumping in, I was writing, doing the research and writing copy. And in the past 2 years, 2 or 3 years, I was started doing the working on the positioning and messaging strategy. And so that's a whole other aspect. It's you have the general and specialized knowledge, but also kind of the foundational and I would say even systems thinking knowledge of how everything works together and how different components and pieces need to fit together to get to the final part, which is the copy. And so now I see everything as kind of systems, and that probably stems from my background as a software engineer as well. And so I see everything as kind of like blocks that fit together, and I can diagnose what's broken and fix and fill in the gaps.
Agree. So one of my favorite things to do on this show is like connect your message with like other guest messages.
Yeah.
Marcello Cavucci, I might have butchered his name. I need to probably review that, but he wrote a book about the Amazon PRFAQ like method of writing strategic narratives.
Yeah.
And you'd think that book is like a framework book, but it's not a framework book. It's actually a book about writing.
Mm.
Which I was very like surprised and like pleased and delighted when I started reading it, because it's just like, how do you write more precisely and like how do you
Yeah.
articulate and and what I love about your software engineer metaphor is that really what is like a database, it's just a bunch of nouns linked together through
Yeah.
relationship and verbs. Business logic is just verbs applied to
Yeah.
nouns, and and adjectives are just metadata. It's so applicable, and I wish knowing that, I wish I actually studied engineering in college, because it does just teach you how to like decompose problems,
Mhm.
and then
Yeah.
you could apply it into a creative field. So I've had to do it more. My technical education has been a lot more ad hoc, but like really understood like the engineering principles. It has made me a better designer and better product
Yeah. Totally.
builder. And one of the things that I'm like seeing in your story is that a well articulated sentence usually has like a really good like subject, object, verb, or like that. It's very clear, like this is happening to this.
Hmm.
And that is like a huge anti pattern that I see in um, like marketing, go to market, and most software companies. The tagline is, we're your operating system, your one stop shop.
Mm. Yeah.
What does that even mean?
Yeah. All in one solution.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally get yeah, the systems thinking, and I would say that's super important. And on the other hand, then you also have the like more human creative side of things of the writing part. And to me, that comes a lot from doing this work and immersing yourself in the research. So understanding how people speak, write, like looking through reviews, watching a lot of sales calls, recordings, understanding how people make decisions, what their objections are, what kind of emotions come up, but also running your own interviews and truly trying to not have like a rigid schedule of questions and just throw the questions at them, but actually listen to them, open up, and trying to follow wherever the conversation goes. And that's where you actually get those human nuances that even I, as a former software engineer, can actually use to be more human and empathize more with these people when I write copy.
The best copywriting usually results in a good differentiation statement just by changing like how you word a sentence increases sales, right? Like David Ogilvy talks about his books that like some of the highest paid like people on his team at like the Ogilvy like agencies in advertising were copywriters, because if
Mm.
you could just wordsmith the right sentence, which is typically like a really good like differentiation statement, that's when like sales like really get unlocked. Could you walk me through what differentiation is? I think it's a very misunderstood concept, especially for like product people. They're just like thinking in like extrinsic motivation, like features, like, oh, APIs and oh, this
Yeah.
feature, and like just like things to justify their existence rather than this is like what we're good at. This is what we don't do. Could you walk me
Yeah.
through like what your definition of differentiation is and positioning?
Yeah. So when I work on positioning for tech B2B SaaS companies, what we try to do is basically to just clearly define who they are, what do they do, who they do it for, and how they do it uniquely better and differently. And that typically comes down to agreeing, especially agreeing is a key word because a lot of times different departments don't really agree on what they do better or differently. Agreeing on saying, I don't know, what are the 2 to 3, we call them differentiated value themes that you offer. So it could be, I don't know, project management software. It could be, I don't know, the visualization of our projects in Kanban style works better, or we have interconnected projects, or different facets of your product. What are those 2 to 3, maximum 4 themes that are kind of unique to you? And how do you combine them? And what features specifically enable those capabilities to actually work for clients? And one thing that all the companies get stuck on is that they think that each of those 3 areas needs to be completely unique. Like no one needs to do those. But especially now, it's quite impossible to be the one to do all of those things. And so what I always try to figure out is saying, okay, even if I don't know 2 of these are not completely unique, someone else is doing them similarly, what makes you unique is the combination of these 3 to 4 elements. So you are the only one who actually does all of these 3 and 4 things this specific way for this specific customer, and that makes you unique, which can doesn't need to be a feature, can also be how you approach things, or maybe what values you align with that make you resonate better with your customer, your ideal customer persona, right? So it's different facets of how you approach the product, your persona, the competition, the style as well. Sometimes it's even just the style. Maybe you're more of a minimalistic kind of app compared to another one that's more for super tech nerds. And so yeah, I think it's finding that right combination of things that are unique, but that in combination make you unique as a whole.
What are some like famous like marketing taglines that you feel like illustrate like these principles very well?
Mm. Right out of the blue, I can't come up with one.
Well,
Uh,
got milk's like an obvious one, right? It focuses on like the absence of milk. There's like a famous like Steve Jobs video where he's
yeah,
talking
yeah.
about like how like Nike in all
Just
their
do it.
advertising, yeah, they don't, yeah, they just do it. They also like their positioning strategy is like focusing on like great athletes. They don't even talk about like shoes,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And so it's oh, our shoes got like these super cool like insoles and stuff. Like they don't say that. They just they
Yeah,
it's ask
like for
yeah,
example,
go yeah,
like
yeah.
one clear example maybe of a company that doesn't really differentiate in any way almost apart from packaging,
Mhm.
but they differentiate maybe with the style, the branding is Liquid Death. So how do they do, right? They basically just sell water, but it's a different style, different way of doing it, bolder advertising as well. So that makes them different. Doesn't need to be their product doesn't need to be super unique.
Yeah, no, and the strategic insight behind Liquid Death was the fact that like it was at like Warp Tour, I think, like a very
Yeah,
like famous like punk rock
instead of
like music
monster.
festival. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
So for the people who don't know that are listening, the artists would take Monster cans and they'd fill them up with water because they had like brand deals with Monster. And so they had to be like drinking the energy drink while like doing music, but they didn't want to be taking like 500 milligrams of caffeine during the day. They're thirsty, they're performing in hot weather. And so they would empty these cans and just fill them up with water. And so that was the core insight that's, hey, this is water for like people that are like doing cool stuff. And it looks like a beer can. And but it allows you to hydrate, but maintain like a certain like status and like
Yeah.
positioning in a community where like energy drinks and like really cool like branding are part of the gig.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And copywriting doesn't necessarily mean like ad copy. It could also be like a messaging strategy of like how do you talk. Like you're not necessarily like writing like every bit of like content on the website. Sometimes you might just be like going over strategy.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, all of my work is the research, then a lot of times positioning and messaging strategy. Messaging strategy is basically okay. Now that you have a clear positioning, so it's clear what you do, who you do it for, and how. How do you say it through different lenses? So maybe it's your narrative strategy that you will use in your sales pitches as a hook, or maybe you have different value propositions in the form of maybe in a gain format, in a loss format, in a more logical format through different like frames and lenses. And also part of the messaging framework is typically the brand voice guidelines as well. A lot of times for example, I also done localization because I had a company that was selling in the US and UK. So we had slight differences there to keep into consideration. And also in the messaging framework, you want to start to address your competition as well. So you understand what your competitors do, maybe differently or better than you as well, or worse than you. And then next to each, you start writing example pieces of copy that address those differentiation and tell your audience why you are better for them specifically. So this is kind of the messaging framework. And then the copy is the actual writing on all the little words on conversion assets. Typically for me, I typically work on website copy, sales email sequences. And I typically don't write all the copy also because a lot of times what I do is typically write the pages of websites, the homepage, the product pages, use case pages, persona pages, pricing, about page. So those are typically the core ones. And then after I'm done, the client can take my messaging framework that we worked on together and they can write the copy on their own, right? And especially now with AI, I typically leave them basically do it yourself practices that tell them, okay, you have a messaging framework. This is kind of the process, the step-by-step process they need to follow to write this page using all these different Lego blocks components from the messaging framework. And then they can take it and work on it on their own.
One thing that I feel like people don't talk about in positioning and messaging frameworks is that it doesn't work unless you actually live your messaging strategy like vertically, like through the vertical stack. And so what I mean by that, and I might rant a little bit because it's okay. People love to talk about how Facebook like only focused on like Ivy League universities and like very very focused. People love to talk about how Amazon just focused on books, but then they turn around and they try to do everything with 30 engineers. And when you make a strong positioning statement, you're also saying, here's who we're not for. And that means you're choosing not to serve certain market segments. So like the second part is like segmentation. And so it's like if you do positioning, it's like it's not going to work unless you actually focus on like the market segments that positioning resonates with. And that's hard for like growth stage startups, especially if you're in the VC game, because
Mm.
you're supposed to grow and like maybe the market segment that resonated that made you successful like early on as a business doesn't have a high enough like total addressable market or like wallet like to give the numbers that your VCs want.
Mm.
And how do you navigate those conversations with customers where they're like, hey, I did an audit of your product. It's not really different. It's pretty commoditized. It's got all the basic features. It doesn't mean that they're doomed, but like, how do you like walk through like those conversations? No, you need to decide like, this is who we're going to serve. This is what we're going to
Yeah.
build for. Yeah.
Yeah, so I work a lot with tech companies that have been acquired by private equity firms a lot of times,
Mm.
and so they basically need to kind of relaunch because their websites are a mess and they don't really have the resources yet, maybe at a certain point. So I work with the private equity operating partner on the go-to-market, right? So which means again research, positioning, messaging, and website sales collaterals if it's sales led. And for example, one recent project that we worked on, they kind of needed to start almost from scratch just because their sales cycle was 11 months or something and they needed to shorten it, but they at the same time they weren't clear on what the product was because it was a data integration and quality product, but they also had a done for you aspect. So it wasn't really just a product, it was, let's call it, a solution. So their team plus the technology working together in a way. And we weren't clear also because they hadn't really done a lot of customer interviews and really almost no data on research data, qualitative or quantitative. And so what we did was, okay, we were able to interview 5 customers, current customers, also because they didn't have a lot and they were huge deals. And so instead of narrowing down to specific personas like CMOs or CTOs or IT tech guys, what we did was actually divide them in 2 super simple buckets, which one was the business buyer and the other one was the tech buyer, because we saw that in the deals, a lot of times who actually found the solution was the business buyer, but then they needed the help of the tech leader to actually look into it and see if it was working with their stack and all that. So there was an example of saying, okay, let's start broad because we don't have the resources yet, and also we are not super clear. So instead of crafting these ICP, ideal customer personas, let's craft these early customer personas, and then from there move forward and be more specific and get specific. And that was helpful because we didn't have to be super specific as long as we clarified, okay, this is what we do better than most, which in their case was, instead of being a data integration and quality solution that basically replaced an entire data stack, in their case, they were solving specific data problems. And that was like kind of the hook that we've used. Something like get your data projects done right, the right way. So very, very succinct, precise, and the kind of measurable impact rather than a super broad architecture change that we even promise customers because there were competitors that are massive in the space, right?
Yeah, it reminds me of the book The Awesome by April Dunford. She's a
Yeah.
big like positioning expert. One of my favorite stories is she talks about how she worked at like a database company and they just weren't converting. And like their whole like positioning when she started was like, we have a better database than the incumbents, and no one was converting because they couldn't compete on price with Oracle and IBM.
Yeah.
And eventually, like they found out that hey, when people that have a lot of data and they just want a database, they just dump the data in there, but they don't like care. And they have all these features of be able to analyze your data. And eventually, like the insight was that like what type of like businesses need quick answers on their data, and eventually they were able to like segment down to like banks who needed to quickly like assess risk
Mm.
based off the data that they were collecting. And when they focus on that, oh, sales went up. That's weird. It's like,
Yeah.
and like when you're a business person that you're in charge of growing revenue, like the temptation is, oh no, I can't like focus on banks because then that means like
I'm
there's a
excluding others.
yeah, exactly. Like I'm excluding
Yeah.
potential revenue opportunities. But the problem is if you're just focusing on revenue, just units sold, regardless of who the business is, it's going to crater your roadmap because
Yeah.
you're not going to be able to build for that bank persona where they have specific problems. And like
Yeah.
it doesn't and one thing I learned, yeah, actually what I'm going to like pause right there because it's like I could continue about this all day, but yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it reminds me. Actually, I was thinking it's kind of like a like very much smaller scale.
Yeah.
Thinking of my career progression at the beginning was also working with e-commerce clients. But then I realized, okay, these guys are mostly solo founders. They're not super aware of what messaging and copywriting is. They're mostly interested in conversion optimization, maybe some usability improvements on their website, which I could do because I also work as a UX lead at an agency. But then everything else that I actually wanted to do and that I was good at, which was the messaging and the copywriting sides of things, that kind of was taking second place. And that's also why I decided, okay, I'm gonna exclude e-commerce. I'm not gonna target them anymore. Only focusing on SaaS. And now it's kind of everything works much smoother because I all my systems are the same. I know my clients very well. All the projects are also more seamless because I've optimized them for SaaS and all the different activities and tasks that we might work on. So yeah, I was thinking focusing on the best fit buyer, even if at the beginning you're not super clear or don't have a lot of data to find the right one. I think it's useful to even just start as kind of with an archetype of your customers, what we did, rather than saying, okay, this is a specific persona. We had a like business side, technical side. What can we do to address their needs?
I like that. Could you walk me through the difference between an archetype and a persona? I think that's a very misunderstood like
Mm.
dichotomy there. Two very different things. And I think like start with an archetype is a great advice, and I want to explain why it's great advice by explaining the difference. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, archetype, the way that I think of it is could be a representative of a group of specific ICPs. So let's say that you have your different ICPs are CMO, CFO, and I don't know, procurement. Those are more of like the business side of things. So you could group them under the business buyer archetype. And then you have, I don't know, CTO, data engineers, developers. Those are more of the technical buyer archetype. And then under each, you could also then differentiate them in who is the check signer. So who's the guy that actually takes out the checks and pays? Who's the manager? So who's the one that supervises everyone? Who's the daily user? So the one that's actually hands on the product, and who's the influencer. So who typically comes into these deals and has their own opinions that influence the buying decision. And lately, you also have AI. So because a lot of people search on, and so it's almost become another one of those like different agents in the buying committee.
Yeah, like there's a SEO with LLMs now because
Mm.
you're using it to be like, can you tell me what to buy, and like almost delegating to an AI like what the right
Yeah.
solution is. Um, yeah, and then a persona. What's the difference between that and a persona?
A persona is when you actually have a clear, super crystal clear idea of who the specific role is, who the psychographic, what the psychographic is of this persona, so how they make decisions, what's the demographic, maybe ranges, the age, location, job, role, and stuff. So this is more like an actual clear profile of your typical buyer. So if you have a check signer, you know that check signer is the CEO. If you have a manager, you know that it's the CMO. If you have the influencer, maybe that's the CTO, and the daily user, maybe like an operator or product people, depending on the type of tools that you have.
Yeah, like when I think about like that's where you actually get to the strategy, like personas. Like archetype is like what most people call a persona. Like it's not a persona, it's like a CTO, like they vary in personality and preference.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so like one pitch that would work for one CTO won't work for another CTO. And so eventually you have to narrow down what kind of CTOs like do
yeah.
we like really have a good fit with, right? Because it's, oh, there's one CTO that likes Pendo. Here's a CTO that likes Heap. Here's a CTO that likes Google Analytics. And those are different. Like, it's almost like you have to look at like the related positioning, other like tech products, right? And just see, oh, what's like your sister tech product that like tends to do well. right? And say, hey, I'm looking for a CTO that like follows this venture capitalist on Twitter because
Yeah.
they have these set of values, or they frequent this Reddit like thread community because value, like they have their own like echo chambers that they focus on. And if you could just focus on just targeting those types of CTOs.
Mm. Yeah, and that's why, for example, they built the tool Spark Toro. I don't know if you're familiar with
SparkToro.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
SparkToro.
so
Yeah.
they built it just to actually help you find your personas using these common themes, right? Like where do they go to find the news? Where do they go to read social media? What influencers they follow? All signals that tell you, okay, these are personas that you might find useful to target.
Yeah, because then you could read the books that they like to read and get like the core ideas, right? So in product, it's, oh, if like you're interviewing for a job and you notice, hey, this person really likes the Marty Kagan books. And so it's, if I could just adjust like my messaging and positioning as like a candidate for the job, where I'm basically quoting like certain like one-liners in the book, your performance tends to do better in the interview process because you are positioning yourself to be like the PM that they're looking for because they're reading a book about like
Yeah,
what,
yeah,
like how PMs should operate. And that sounds like manipulation, but it's not like manipulation. It's just being like considerate of what they care about. Like
yeah.
they
It's
don't threat your
it's getting
features.
yeah, it's getting inside their heads in a way, and just like living inside their minds, inhabiting their minds in a way.
Yeah. And then that way it's like and then that's like where like you could unlock a ton of conversion by just adjusting like your hero header on the website is,
Yeah,
oh, this is
yeah,
for product teams that just want to get shit done, and like your positioning is that like you're a insights product for people that don't want to like have PhD level rigor in their process, but then other people, they want PhD level rigor. And
yeah.
like your whole product, like your feature set, like how you approach like the solutions for those features could be completely different.
Like for example, I two different types of approaches that I saw lately. So I work with. I've actually had a chat with someone who has a synthetic research platform. So basically, they help you use AI to simulate your buyer personas, and their approach is pretty much just sign up, build your personas, chat with your personas. Then I had another chat, a potential client, and they are building again another kind of synthetic research platform, but they are all professors, like Stanford professors, and their point of view, their kind of positioning is we are a very much academic synthetic research platform. So we don't overpromise. We are super technical. We have our GitHub repo. We have our open source version. Everything, like if you have to get started, starts with code. So I wouldn't even probably be able to get started on their website. But that's like two different perspectives targeting two different specific personas, which might be the same, but then when you actually look into the details and there are specific approaches, these personas are also different now because I wouldn't be able to use their platforms, but I'm able to use the other one, and I'm also gonna choose the simpler one. No, no, just because I can't really go into the code and all the specific.
Yeah. And because you're not that persona, like you need a kind of a done for you
Yeah,
onboarding. And it's a cool, you found like a good fit with a solution,
yeah,
but that won't work for like a very like technical researcher that needs academic sources and like peer reviewed journals to get their job done.
yeah,
And so there's so much, and what I love about this conversation is that it really just gives you like this abundance mindset of, oh, there's so much opportunity. A lot of people just be like, oh, Google's already doing it, or chat like OpenAI's already doing it. OpenAI has all the market share. They're in 95% of like Fortune 500s. But I think Claude does a really good job on positioning where they're like, oh, it's AI for thinkers. It's for the engineers. It's for the design. It's for the people that like make or are trying to understand complex problems and do data analysis. And
yeah,
ChatGPT is trying just to be like the app store at this point. They don't have a dominant model compared to like other products. But Claude's, hey, we don't need to be the biggest. but they have a very fantastic business because they've really focused on, hey, if you're a writer or like a developer or a scientist or anything like that, like this is the AI you use. And so like anyone that like has that like scarcity mindset where they're just like, oh, chat's already won, and they don't even try because they think that there's no like cheese left in the market to go for. This conversation should be making you very stoked and like happy. Oh, cool. If I could just figure out like the right segment to focus on, could get my own piece of the pie because there's always going to be like underserved markets.
Yeah, it's a case of the frame makes the picture sometimes. Like the way you frame things helps a lot in selling and also presenting your product.
Now, for like copywriting and like messaging strategies, what are like what are like the companies that you feel are like doing it very well? Like when you're like analyzing, I guess, who are your heroes when it comes to
I'm seeing a great company that's doing really well is Chili Piper,
Chili
and
Piper?
they do a lot of I think like metrics for like revenue tracking, revenue metrics, and yeah, their messaging is great. I mean, they know their customers very well. Another one that I follow their podcast as well is called Passeto.
So
Yeah, and they a very good podcast as well. But also, again, they know their customers very well, and they have a strong point of view. Their founder, I think Chris Walker, is big on LinkedIn as well. And he's got like a very strong, opinionated perspective. And yeah, they do it very well. And I think everything like it all comes down to actually having a strong point of view. So why are you doing it? And why are you building it for these specific people? And also what's your approach? How's it different? And all the companies that you see strong messaging, it actually boils down to a strong positioning first. Because if you don't have that, it's kind of everything's more diluted and you can see it on the page.
yeah, can you have strong messaging if you don't have some haters?
That's a good question. Yeah, I think you can, but maybe depending on the market where you're at, if it's a very highly competitive, saturated market, then not having haters might be detrimental in the sense that the haters can actually push you further.
Yeah, the obvious thing that I've seen is like the coolest case study. And a founder's podcast, I think his name's Dietrich, I forgot his last name, but it was the founder of Red Bull. He has an autobiography, but it's in German. It's not even
Oh
like
yeah,
like translated. And so the founders podcast, they did an episode on him where they actually translated the biography of the founder of Red
yeah,
Bull, and he like goes over like that Red Bull, like even down to like the business activities. Dietrich he's a marketer. He made it very clear that like he's going to be using his marketing competencies and doing advertising and brand and like selling in house, and then offloading like manufacturing and can production and offshoring that, which is like opposite of most businesses. So that's a counter positioning of
yeah,
no, we're going to focus on like brand, like Nike, how Nike does it. And then talks about the Red Bull F1 team and how he's like the money that like he does, it's not a profitable like expense to pay for two F1 teams because he bought two.
yeah.
And but the money that team has brought in has covered the cost just in drink revenue because an advertising activity, a brand exercise for him, and like choosing to be unapologetically like himself and like the brand. And
Yeah.
other energy drink companies have since followed suit and stuff like that. But Red Bull is like the first to start sponsoring athletes with like their branding, but it has led to people not liking Red Bull. But that's like the magic of like really good messaging is like, cool, you're having people just self-select out of like buying from you. And now you don't have any churn, and you could just make a really great product because like
Yeah.
you're getting good feedback, you're able to reinforce with the segment. I love talking about this stuff. Like,
Yeah, it's a feedback loop. Yeah, exactly. And going back to Liquid Death, for example. Did you see that they made was it like a cold immersion tub or something?
No, I
Yeah,
haven't.
with like in the shape of a can, huge, and they were selling it on the website. That's another example of good marketing.
Yeah. Yeah, hey, they don't need to be the best cold plunge company, but
Yeah.
like you can't forget about it. And especially in a very competitive market, you have to be like sufficiently different. Dyson did it very well where you got to try to be different. Like like his whole like in his book, his first autobiography Against the Odds, he just said, I don't care about talking about features. So I want people to look at a row of vacuums, see like Hoover vacuums, and then look at this like spaceship contraption that's what the heck is this thing? And then read the story about like why he got rid of the bag and like that the bag like you immediately lose suction with every new bag. And it was so different. No one it led to an emotional response of, oh, I want this because I want to be seen as different, not because it's like a better vacuum. I don't know if it's a better vacuum.
Mm.
Like like the
Yeah,
fact that it is a
status.
better yeah, exactly. The fact that it is a better vacuum doesn't matter. It's the features don't matter. It's the intrinsic motivation of like, how does this product make me feel single to other people that like I'm a certain person,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
And I mean with tech software, especially it's like software is a bit harder to get to that point, but at the same time a lot of good software companies with good messaging create a community around them, and that's probably that same sense of like the feeling of being part of like a movement or something bigger.
Like a company that's doing it very well is a project management software, Linear. It's like they have done such a good job at their positioning where they're like, no, we're not going to service like the middle managers that want reports, or we will not be developing features to optimize for reporting. We have
Mm.
built-in reporting features. If you don't like it, F off. And just focusing on like the IC, like getting stuff done and like
Yeah.
making the best like project management experience possible. And then like their brand is so strong that they have a job board of like companies that use Linear. They're like, oh, hey, if you want to use Linear but your company isn't using it, here's a job board of companies that use Linear if you want to go work for them.
Well, that's crazy.
But it's ironically the SaaS companies that like have really good positioning, like the founders are like designers and stuff. Like
Mm.
yeah, it's hard when it's like a typical PM like MBA
Yeah.
type, but it is what it is. But yeah, it is. I'm just like that example is like a proof that it is possible. Like you're choosing to be something and live those values,
Mhm.
and it's I don't know. It's just really hard to do when you're like that's why VC thinks almost like the money, the financial like incentives behind venture capital actually like
This,
poorly branded companies.
yeah, destroying the efforts of a company.
Yeah. So be careful. They're called dolphins for a reason. Is they need their money back in 5 years, or they'll mess you up.
Mm.
It's
Yeah.
here's so Chris, what do you feel like hasn't been said that should be said before we sign off? And then second question, like that you can answer after, is how can people find your work?
I think maybe, and that's because it's on my mind lately when it comes to copywriting and clients writing online and reaching out, well, especially when like using AI to write copy. I would say yes, you can actually be very good at a first draft, but it all depends on the context that you give it. So the context that you engineer before it. So what I always do with clients and what I always recommend is first do the research and then don't feed all the research to AI and have it right. Or sometimes they don't even feed the research, just ask it to write, which is even worse. Use the research, distill it into your strategy, and then use the strategy as context for the LLM so they can actually make sense of the data better, and then you can actually write pretty good copy. But because
Yeah,
a lot of the clients they start writing copy, but it's all, especially using which has got pre-training inside, and even if you use a custom GPT, it's never going to be as good as actually writing on your own with the right research and data.
and that's why Claude's the goat for like writing good stuff. So what I'm hearing from you is don't let AI do your synthesis for you.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, and another thing, like it daisy chain your prompts. One chat for helping you find signal, maybe another chat for thinking through the strategy, and then the third chat, which might be like a custom GPT for writing with your editorial style guide
Yeah,
and all that stuff to provide context on what the actual like synthesized strategy is. Like, and
yeah,
everyone tries to do it in like one chat session. It's like
exactly. Yeah,
you need to like,
the more you compartmentalize your tasks in the LLMs, the better it works. And I don't even use ChatGPT like for writing or Claude, and it's mostly because of the limits, the response limits that I always like with my work. I typically pass pretty fast, but there are loads of third-party tools that you can actually use with your team as well. So you can share chats, and you can collaborate, and they allow you to plug into the APIs, or OpenAI API or Anthropic API, which is great because you have the best of both worlds, but then you are not tied to those that pre-training that those commercial interfaces have.
yeah. And how can people find your work?
They can find me on my website, conversionalchemy.net, where I have a newsletter, and on LinkedIn. So I'm usually pretty chatty there, and I try to post every day, so you can find me there.
And what's your full name? I don't think we mentioned that.
Christopher, I typically like Chris. Chris,
Okay. Chris, and like your handles, and I'll make sure to like link in the show notes as
awesome.
well. Yeah, one thing I like to say, like I really admire the fact that you've embraced AI in your practice. Do you think, like I guess my like closing question is, do you, what was the insight that like led to you embracing AI when like others are like, oh no, like
Mm.
I'm being disrupted? Like,
Yeah, that's first was actually probably a feeling that I've always had of like never being good enough. See, and maybe it stems from the fact that I'm like a non-native English writer, and so I've always said like, what if I could be better? And then I saw AI, and now the playing field is leveled for anyone. And so what I decided was I'm gonna try every single tool that I can to just explore as much as possible and learn what actually works best. And so then I can actually keep up just because things are changing every week. And also, I saw the potential. Like once a very specific process and systematic process, AI can only amplify that. So if you like the process, AI is going to produce crap. If you have a process, AI is going to produce good stuff. So I only saw it as an improvement towards the craft.
when I was in university, I worked at the school paper, and this is long before AI was a thing. And as a writer, you like at a newspaper, you're paired with an editor, and your job is to just generate like the prose, but the editor's job is to make sure that it fits the style guides, is within 100 words or 500
Mm.
words or 1,000 words, depending on like the real estate on the paper. Um, and if newspapers knew that like you could separate the composition from the editorial like for hundreds of years, like AI just amplifies that. Like you could just
Yeah.
program like a custom Claude project or GPT or and create like this context interview persona that like interviews you for context, and you train it on like an editorial style guide. Like every dot two, like they have a really great GPT, or like it's like a GPT for like incorporating style guide, when to use M dashes, like
Mm.
grammatical like style. And so now it's like you just give it context, and then it just fits it into like great like editorial style guide, like what words not to use and stuff like that. And so like that, to 100% agree. It's like it never was about like the writing itself. It's the thinking that happens before the writing, and
Yeah,
then
exactly.
you just need to fit that like those ideas into like a framework that matches your brand and your strategy.
Yeah,
That's it.
yeah, totally. Yeah, I actually just wrote a piece for Every, and like even working with their editors is like it's like amazing because they actually make you see things from different perspective, and so you truly understand. Okay, this is the writing side, and then the editor has got a totally different job, and you try to mirror that same workflow when working with AI.
Yeah, I don't think if you embrace it and you learn how AI works, like creatives, like your job isn't in danger. Your job, it's just like your positioning is gonna suffer because there are peers in your industry that are embracing AI and they're
Mm.
moving faster and their output's greater, but they're like the craft, the taste, like that just makes you better and like amplifies your ability to do more with AI. But that's cool that you wrote for Fred Every. I need to find the article and like link it on the
Yeah,
post.
I wrote a couple of pieces, like a series on synthetic research last
Okay.
year, and then the last one that came out last week, actually, I think, which is more on the actual writing, context engineering process.
I might have actually read one of your articles. It's always fun to read people's articles and then like they end up on the podcast and I'm like, oh wait,
Yeah,
that's
you just
you.
stumble
Like,
on them. Yeah.
yeah. So Chris, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. Thank you for coming on the show. You have a good one.
Thank you so much, Kaden. Loved it.